So it takes 3 months for us to hire
In that
somebody.
case, it did, yeah.
I see that's
Why?
often the case for many departments. I don't know.
Do you know why?
I
Is it HR?
don't know how much to,
I'm just curious because
so I
HR
would,
was here, and I'm
yeah,
curious about their turnaround time because part of the challenges, based on what I was hearing, is salaries. Okay, so now if we offer a decent
yes.
salary, how long does it take the city to hire somebody who's qualified?
So I've frankly seen instances where I thought that the salary that we were offering was fair, and it did still take a while to bring someone on board. And so in this case, this is a good example of something where we identified a solid candidate. The salary was fair. They were very willing to come on board and ready to start working, and the process has just taken a while. And then in other cases, it's true that we're just not offering a salary that's actually reasonable for what the industry is offering. And so we have a hard time getting people interested. Or once we do, if it takes us a while to move things along, they go to
Yeah.
another job or find a better opportunity. So I would say, depending on the case, it's either one or the other. And in terms of why it's taking long on my end, um, it's taking it's taking me a long time because I have no support staff to help me write job descriptions or get things ready to be able to send out. I have, we try to just do it amongst ourselves whenever we can. So sometimes we delay the process. But I would say more often, once it leaves my hands, there's a process in place with multiple other departments that are involved, and it moves through all of those. And I don't know how long it takes at each one of those steps
I mean,
for personnel decisions, I mean.
You want to jump in here? Somebody want to jump in here to clear this?
So I think in just having sat in HR's department hearing and understanding the structure of financing, if you can recall, a couple years ago, the city and or HR did a kind of sort of pay equity study and trying to get salaries in line, but there's also the portion of updating the compensation structure for the city, and that does fall on finance. So ultimately, if you saw yesterday in OMB's proposal, one of OMB's goals is to provide and update the city's code on actual like designated salaries, because over the years the cities have changed salaries, but we haven't updated the code. And ultimately, we're going to try to fit in those structures, but there's also working realities with any organization when it comes to hiring. I mean, we are in the great resignation and people are moving into jobs and options that have other flexibilities. And I do know in the law department's conversation, they were asking to work from home. If we're not attracting and doing other things, those are real discussions that impacts directors and trying to move forward with what we're working to do. So there's many factors that really leads into that. I do know that HR did in their meeting talk about the Grow Forward program. I know you were a big advocate that looking internally if there is other employees in other departments or areas that could transfer over. I know this department is very technical in their skills, but those are all things that we're evaluating and trying to get a handle of within the city.
It's an HR problem. It is. It's an HR problem because I don't see why it takes 3 to 4 months to hire somebody if they have the skill set and the salary's there. It's
And-
different if that's not there, but if it's there, it shouldn't take that long for us as a city to hire, just like it takes long for us to pay somebody. I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with this.
There's a concern though too, especially with some of these positions where there's not only great need within the department for the city to function, but with things like the ESIP program and the management through sustainability and our inspectors, these are also things that are either going to be revenue generators, which the city is lacking right now coming
Correct.
out of COVID. Like we all know, we're still not where we were
Correct.
before. But also the ESIP program is meant to save the city money long-term. So if we don't start moving on that, every year we don't move is another year in the future, we're not going to be saving money as a city. And also, it's being touted as the first microgrid in the state, but if we don't get moving on it, we might not be the first.
Correct.
So it's like, and that is also going to sustain the city should we have another storm. And that is a very, very, very real probability. So I understand things move slow in a city perspective, but we have to find a way to start moving a little bit quicker because we can't be losing talent because
Correct.
it's taking 3 months to hire. I was in a position too where there was somebody who was going to come onto my staff and they couldn't wait for the changes to come about. And you know, it's affecting everyone across the city because we're hearing this repeatedly from every single department and every single division. If it was one or two, I might say, okay, maybe there's something else happening, but it seems to be something that is across the entire city right now. It's absolutely systemic, and it's incumbent upon us to work together to fix it,
Yeah, I agree.
you know?
It's HR.
Yeah, but it's,
I'm
but
gonna stick, I'm gonna
it's,
stick with that because I think a lot of times they're policies. Because we ask for policies and things like that from HR and certain things we have not received yet. So I just believe it's somebody's not doing what they're supposed to do, and that's just the truth. It don't make sense for somebody to get hired. You go for interview and come back 3 months later. That makes no sense.
but honestly, it's insulting to the person that's being
Correct.
interviewed.
Correct.
It's insulting to the
Correct.
professional that we're trying to say, these
Correct.
are all the reasons you should come work for the city. The pay might not be as good in the private sector, but this is why you should work for us. And then they don't hear from anybody for a month or two. That's insulting.
It is.
But
Right.
getting off HR for a second and getting back to priority projects for the board, I'm glad to hear that you guys are going to be taking a different look at them, because there have been some projects for my ward and in borders that I share with my council colleagues that are still waiting for completion, and I've been doing this a little bit longer than you, so I get a little bit more frustrated. So I'm glad to hear that there's a shift in that.
Okay.
That wasn't meant to be personal to you, Councilman. I'm just saying that there's a frustration sometimes with the way the priority projects get moved. That's all.
Okay. I reserve no comment.
I just want to mark Councilperson Gilmore present at 11:08 a.m. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions? Councilman Gilmore? Okay. I just wanted to give you that little window of opportunity.
I was going to ask a question, actually. Do you see any redundancies between HEDC and Department of Infrastructure, like in terms of responsibilities? Like, is there like a situation where, you know, someone will be like, oh, this is my jurisdiction, and then someone else is like, no, this is the FBI, we're coming in, like, you know, this is like that? Because sometimes it's like there's like you know, they have construction code officials, we have construction code officials, you know,
Yeah.
both sides have like I'm just wondering, is there any way to make those the collaboration or even the budget more efficient when it comes to that?
I can ask Paul to speak to this a little bit more, but and maybe Drew, but from my perspective, I don't see redundancies. If anything, I think I'm still seeing gaps in making sure that all areas are covered in terms of what needs to be covered related to inspection, permitting, enforcement, etc. And when you first started asking the question, I was actually thinking more about transportation planning, because we do still have one of our transportation planners who sits and is shown under the planning division. But the idea here would be to consolidate all of that under transportation planning and have that division do all of the work. But if you guys have anything to add about the construction code and traffic permitting inspections.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I agree. I don't think there's a redundancy. It is more, you know, we are filling in some more gaps, and we do coordinate with them as much as possible to fill those gaps. One being the firehouse we're working on. There is some damage to an adjacent property. We have construction code involved to rectify that, make sure going forward everything's safe and there's no more damage done to the adjacent property down for the new firehouse. Yeah, and I just want to echo what Barker said. We are, I'd say, more filling gaps than overlapping and doing redundant work.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say, taking that one step further, because of the nature of the work that these divisions do, and them usually having a higher budget than a lot of the other departments and divisions, often we are also covering either expenses or work for the other departments that's not originally slated for the scope of services that this department is to provide. And so that's another thing when the numbers that are allocated in the budget could become an issue, when we're already, getting a lower amount than requested, but then it's eaten away because we're trying to serve the needs of other departments, because emergencies come up all the time. There are situations all the time when we just have to figure out a solution because it can't wait to, say, well, your department doesn't have that money, so we're not gonna help you out there. And these things happen all the time, and I would say happen more frequently to these few divisions because by nature of their work, they tend to have a larger budget allocated, because of, all of the construction work that they're doing. So just one other thing that I think we should all be mindful of.
Okay.
Okay, I think I do. I found some questions.
I have one more. Actually, no. I defer to you, Councilman. I'll save my last one to the end.
I just want to, from an infrastructure perspective, does it affect the infrastructure as we get in the business of knocking down 1 and 2 family homes, building 6 and 12 family units where those 1 and 2 homes? Does it affect the infrastructure at all, or?
For something like that, it may not be as significant of a change, but when there is a major rezoning of areas, when we're completely changing the context and the character of the buildings in place and what we're going to be building in the future, yeah, it puts a strain on the infrastructure and the utilities and all of this, basically what is the spine of the city. And in those cases, typically HEDC through planning initiates the process of asking the applicant who is looking to do that work to do a number of analyses and studies to tell the city exactly what the impact is going to be. And then at a certain point in the process, that comes over to engineering for them to review and then for them to provide their comments, so that before it goes to planning board or zoning board for approvals, the city agencies have looked at it and have done their best to hold the applicant accountable for things like that. I'll be honest, it's not a perfect system. A lot of times we miss things. A lot of times we don't have the applicant doing as extensive of a study or giving us all the information that we should or could have in order for us to make a determination. So it's not all the time that happens, but we do have a system in place for how we would address something like that.
Okay, now with respect to the studies, specifically traffic studies, how frequently are the studies done and what data is used? Because I'll be going to a lot of different meetings. It's like, well, we conduct a traffic study, and the traffic study say that, it's not going to affect the area. And I'm looking like, well, the area is affected already with just this many units, and it's bringing more. So how is that possible?
Both come up. Yeah. So the process currently in place for how we determine whether a traffic study even happens, let alone what it includes, is within the jurisdiction of the planning director, and that's the way the code is written. So the planning director at any point in the process for any application that the planning division receives can say, I require this applicant to do a traffic study. And so sometimes that is used, sometimes that isn't used if it's deemed that it's not necessary. And then Jen and Mike can talk more about what elements are within the traffic study itself. And I agree with you that we should really be requiring a lot more than we do right now. And maybe we can revisit that our department also has the authority to require those things and not just planning. I'm sure planning would actually really like that, because they don't want to be the sole, responsible party. But so that's how it works right now, and they can talk about what they look at and how comprehensive it is.
Yeah, so Jen and I both have staff that, in addition to staff in engineering that reviews kind of the site civil plans, we also review the traffic studies and kind of the way that people access these sites. So specifically in transportation planning, we're looking for things like multimodal accessibility. Are there, cycling, transit facilities available to these developments? And then also just the total safety aspect. So can we require developers to do things like curb extensions as part of their project, to shorten the pedestrian crossings and things like that? And then Jen could talk about traffic engineering and traffic impact.
Yeah, so traffic engineering focuses more on the technical stuff. So when you do a traffic study, you collect traffic count data, and then you do an analysis of how that traffic generated by the new development would impact the existing traffic network. And then we also look at, access to the buildings and circulation through the development. So those are the types of things that we look at.
So sometimes the applicant is modeling out what they think will happen when the new development goes in, and they're putting numbers to, because now this is a high-rise building, or because now this went from a 1 and 2 family house to a 6-story building, there will be this many more trips generated by this building, because obviously more people will be living there will be different uses, and they'll model everything out, and they'll say, this is exactly what we think the impact will be on this street and whatever surrounding area that planning division requires them to look at, which is not always as comprehensive as we, would want it to be. And then in other cases, the applicant sort of has, not quite an extensive study, and they sort of just say, well, these are the standards in the industry for if there's a 6-story building, this is how many numbers it generates, and it's not always from an urban context. Like, we're a very densely populated city, but the average numbers they use sometimes are industry standard, which don't apply to Jersey City. And so the team does their best to go back and say, this is not relevant for our context. You have to revise it. You have to redo it. We need you to come up with a better impact assessment. But again, like Jennifer herself or Mike himself are doing that analysis for every site plan application that comes in. So it's not always, we don't always catch everything that we could.
So these plans, so they're up to date is what I'm asking. Because I'm really trying to figure out.
They're up to date in terms of their own building, but what they don't, so let's say there are multiple buildings being constructed in a neighborhood.
Yes.
They don't always comprehensively look at all of them, and that's the problem. So it's their job to piece together one study with another study, and one could have a lot of great data, one could have not a lot of data at all, and so they try to do their best job to piece all those things together. But right now, we don't have a standard that says for every single traffic impact study and parking impact study that's done, these are the things that should be included in every single study. We do not have that right now.
And we do really push the consultant teams that work with these developers to look at the adjacent developments that are being planned, take into account those units that are being created, and incorporate into their traffic study as much as we can in as big an area as we can.
Yeah, so we're trying to be proactive about saying we will use funding that we have to hire consultants to do the study, or use consultants that are already doing the work to capture a larger area. But that's really something, maybe that shouldn't be the way that we're doing it. We're just doing it because we know it's going to be at some point a problem, and so we're trying to be proactive about it.
Because the issue I have is we have a building going up on Storms, but there's an approval already in the triangle. So I can't imagine that the traffic study they did is going to account for the traffic that's going to be in the approval because it's not there yet.
Right, they don't always.
Something,
And that's a planning division function right now.
something I'm working on with planning with the modeling out to New York, where they have to look at 3 adjacent sites, not abutting sites, but in the area. But this is something that's kind of not budget related, so if we could sort of stick, but you should definitely revisit
Yeah,
that
we'd
with
be happy
them.
to talk more about it.
And I can tell you what I request for projects in the ward, because your and mine have some similarities also with things that might have been approved 3-4 years ago that are only getting funding to start now, which is another impact and implication on everything else. But that I think is it's an important conversation, but maybe not germane to the budget right now.
Can we look at making zones for the parklets? Because I know like there was like the parklet fees that were instituted, but maybe to encourage adoption in lower density areas. Because as we know, 50% of the parklets are downtown, and I'd like to have more up in the heights, but it seems like it's cost prohibitive for some folks because they're not getting the same foot traffic, and we don't have the same amount of high rises and as downtown does.
Yeah, we can, Mike will look into it with his team. We base the fees just on a flat, we want to cover what a parking meter would have generated in any parking location. But I understand your point about the fact that it's not always, parking meters in all parts of the city are not treated equal, and some of them are always occupied, some of them are not. So
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's a policy decision, right? And the council has the opportunity to amend the policy. But you're right. I think in general, curb space does have different values in different parts of the city, and that goes back to also just the metered parking rates that we charge should probably reflect that. So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to explore that some more going forward.
Okay. Also, I know we spoke about this at the council meeting when you were made the director, regarding your salary. Has that been codified both, in your paycheck? Have you seen your salary increase? No?
no, I haven't yet.
Okay, all right. Are we gonna correct this, or? Because, she's yes, she's a director.
Yes.
Okay.
So a lot of the changes with salaries, you have to, again, mining budget processes and impact, right? We're in temporary budget and things of that nature. So it will be changed, and Barca, mine hasn't changed either. So it's going to happen
Do we know when?
after the adoption of the budget.
Okay, so that's after the city council approves it,
Yep.
or
Yeah.
does that happen typically, like with?
So if you can recall, like kind of sort of what the BA said in his presentation, and to Frank's prior question, like what is the process? How do our directors compensated? What they started and they were doing in September. I think pre-COVID, there was a standardized format that was introduced by the prior BA and HR director. Now coming into this, we're trying to standardize things, and I have to objectively say, when I do see small increments throughout the city, I have to remind everyone that there is a fiscal process that when certain timing and deliverables should happen. And so I'm looking to revisit some of those things that requests are coming in. So having this being my first budget hearing and listening to everyone, I'm going to come back with timelines, directives. Compensation is both finance and HR related. So those are kind of sort of the two integrations that need to happen.
Okay. I'm only biased because, when the council when we approved our own salary increases, like we saw it, commensurate, like within the next month it happened. Like I saw the increase. So that's why I was like.
And I objected to it because you guys should have had it in the timeline. But it has to be timeline. Like everything that we're discussing and everything that we're doing has to be done. And I understand that it needs to be in order, but understand and heard.
I understand. You're the Iron Bank and we have to plan things out. Okay, so we have to make sure we're, spending appropriately and on a timeline.
Any other questions? Nope.
Okay.
All righty. With that being said, may I have a motion to adjourn at 11:33 a.m.?
Council President motion. I'm going to second.
I tell you, Councilperson Salay's taking my job. So Council President Waterman made the motion to adjourn. I had a seconded by Councilperson Saleh. On the motion to adjourn at 11:33 a.m., all council members present by acclamation, please say aye.
Aye.
We are out of here at 11:33 a.m. Thank you so much, everyone. And remember, as I always say, teamwork makes the dream work. See you later.